The grandfather clock in Dr. James Reynolds' study chimed 7 times, its solemn melody echoing through the silent rooms of his Craftsman home on Maple Avenue. At 59, the retired psychologist had perfected the art of invisibility in the Oakridge community. His days blended together in carefully orchestrated solitude, a rhythm as predictable as the antique clock's pendulum. His neighbors knew him only as the silver-haired man who collected his newspaper at precisely 6:15 each morning, tended his garden with inexplicable precision, and disappeared inside his home before the evening news began. Inside his modest but elegant house at 127 Maple Avenue, every object told a story of meticulous care. Psychology journals lined mahogany bookshelves in perfect chronological order, their spines showing the gentle wear of decades of reference. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hardwood floors gleamed with weekly polishing. Even the copper kettle that sat on his vintage stove caught the morning light in exactly the same way each day, having been wiped to a perfect shine after its single daily use for his morning tea. Most mornings, neighbors could glimpse him through his kitchen window, measuring precisely 2 teaspoons of Earl Grey into his ceramic teapot, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. The ritual never varied. Water heated to exactly 200 degrees, steeped for 4 minutes, no more, no less. He would then carry his teacup to his east-facing sunroom, where a worn leather armchair allowed him to observe the neighborhood's morning activities while remaining safely behind sheer curtains. Some neighbors wondered why such an accomplished man lived in such profound isolation. Others simply ceased to notice his presence at all. Mrs. Chen, the retired elementary school teacher who lived 2 doors down, occasionally attempted conversation when their paths crossed at the local farmer's market. She would comment on his impeccable tomato plants or share news about the upcoming community festival, but James had mastered the art of polite deflection, offering small nods and briefer responses until she would inevitably move on to more receptive neighbors. What none of them knew, what James himself tried desperately to forget, was that the true story of his solitude lay hidden in a weathered leather briefcase in his attic. It contained case files from 2009, handwritten notes in his precise script, and a framed photograph lying face down, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. Each item represented a chapter in a professional tragedy he'd spent 15 years trying to outrun. The briefcase remained untouched beneath carefully labeled storage containers, gathering dust beside Christmas decorations he never displayed and family photographs he couldn't bear to look at. That briefcase hadn't been opened in 12 years, but its presence weighed on him like a shadow, especially on quiet nights when the memories threatened to break through the carefully constructed walls of his routine. James had long ago learned that routine was safety. Predictability meant control, and control meant survival. His schedule was his fortress: wake at 5:30 a.m., tea at 6, newspaper at 6:15, garden tending from 7 to 8:30, clinical journal reading until noon, lunch at 12:15 precisely, afternoon walk through the neighborhood between 2 and 3 when most people were still at work, dinner preparation beginning at 5 though sharp. His garden was his one concession to beauty over pure order. The small plot behind his house exploded with color. Lavender and rosemary bordered by marigolds, carefully tended roses climbing the eastern trellis, and a small vegetable patch that produced more than he could eat alone. Neighborhood children would sometimes stop to admire the butterflies that danced among his flowers through the wrought iron fence. In those moments, James would retreat inside, unable to bear the sound of children's laughter so close to his property. But on this particular spring evening, as he methodically deadheaded his roses and checked his mail for the second time that day, a moving truck rumbled down Maple Avenue, disrupting the peaceful quiet. It stopped at number 132, the Hendersons, old colonial that had stood empty since the elderly couple had relocated to Florida 4 months ago. James watched from behind his carefully trimmed hornbeam hedge as a man in his early 40s stepped out of a sleek black SUV, dressed in an expensive-looking casual button-down and designer jeans. The man moved with confident purpose, surveying his new property with obvious satisfaction. But it was the two children who emerged next that caught James's attention. The boy appeared to be around 10, carrying a backpack that seemed too heavy for his slight frame. He kept his eyes on the younger girl, who couldn't have been more than 7, maintaining a protective closeness that stirred something in James's. In professional memory, the girl clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, her dark hair falling in neat braids that couldn't quite conceal the wariness in her expression. "Welcome to the neighborhood," called Mrs. Chen, emerging from her house with what appeared to be a homemade casserole. "I'm Olivia Chen. We're so pleased to have a family moving in again." "Derek Winters," the man replied with a broad smile that showcased perfect teeth. "These are my children, Liam and Emma. We're thrilled to be here in Oakridge. I've heard wonderful things about the community." James turned away quickly when Derek glanced in his direction, but not before noticing something in the stranger's smile that sent an involuntary chill down his spine. It was a smile that didn't quite reach. The eyes, a carefully constructed mask that James recognized all too well from his years of clinical practice. It was the polished veneer that certain personalities crafted to conceal what lay beneath. That night, for the first time in years, James lay awake well past his usual bedtime of 9:30, listening to the sounds of his new neighbors settling in. The occasional thud of furniture being arranged, a child's muffled cry quickly silenced, the sharp sound of something or someone hitting a wall. Each noise made him flinch beneath his perfectly pressed sheets. As midnight approached, James found himself standing at his bedroom window, staring at the warm yellow squares of light from number 132. A small shadow passed across one of the upstairs windows, a child's silhouette that seemed to be pacing. Without conscious thought, he found his hand reaching for the phone on his nightstand, hovering over the keypad before withdrawing. What would he say? Who would he call? And what right did he have to interpret shadows on a wall? The grandfather clock downstairs struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent house like a warning. Somewhere in the darkness, time ticked, away the minutes toward a confrontation that would shatter the careful silence of Maple Avenue forever, and force James to finally confront the ghosts he'd spent years trying to escape. The Winters family settled into 132 Maple Avenue with the kind of efficiency that comes from practice. Within days, the house bore no trace of the Hendersons, transformed instead into what Derek proudly called their fresh start. The facade was picture perfect. Crisp white curtains hung in every window, seasonal flowers adorned the front planters, and the lawn was immaculately maintained. Derek made sure of that. Appearances, he often reminded his children, were everything. To the casual observer, Derek Winters appeared to be the model single father. At 41, he cut an impressive figure in the neighborhood with his athletic build, carefully maintained salt and pepper hair, and business casual attire suggesting successful but approachable professionalism. He worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative for a prestigious company, his home office visible through the front window like a carefully arranged display of professional success. "The company's been very understanding about my situation," he explained to Mrs. Chen one morning, his voice carrying across the yard to where James stood pruning his hornbeam hedge. "After Caroline, my wife, passed away last year, they allowed me to relocate and work primarily from home. Helps me be there for the kids, you know." His smile drew sympathetic nods from Mrs. Chen, who murmured condolences about his departed wife. But James, watching from behind his hedge, noticed how Derek's hands tensed slightly at the mention of Caroline's name, how his smile tightened at the corners in a way that triggered James's old clinical instincts. The story about Caroline's death varied subtly with each telling. Sometimes she had succumbed to a sudden illness, sometimes to a car accident. The inconsistencies were slight, but to James's trained ear, they registered as discordant notes in an otherwise perfect symphony of grief. Emma, the 7-year-old, started second grade at Oakridge Elementary with all the right supplies and a perfectly packed lunch each day. She was polite to a fault. Her "yes, sir" and "no, ma'am" responses delivered with practiced precision. Her teachers praised her academic performance, though Miss Jordan, her second-grade teacher, noted that she rarely participated in class discussions and seemed to avoid interaction with other children during recess. During the first parent-teacher conference, Derek charmed the staff with his apparent dedication to his daughter's education. "Emma's always been shy," he explained, his tone conveying just the right mixture of concern and protective father's pride. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She takes after her mother that way. We're working on bringing her out of her shell, aren't we, sweetheart?" Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor, her long sleeves pulled down over her wrists despite the warm classroom. 10-year-old Liam was enrolled in 5th grade, his small frame making him look younger than his years. Unlike his sister, he struggled academically, often appearing distracted in class. His teacher, Mr. Patel, noticed how he startled at loud noises and seemed to withdraw further into himself whenever an adult male entered the classroom. During recess, he could be found watching his sister from a distance, seemingly more concerned with keeping her in sight than playing with his peers. The neighborhood watched as the family's routines established themselves. Derek would wave to passing neighbors while collecting the morning paper. Emma and Liam would walk to school together, Liam always keeping a protective hand near his sister's shoulder. On weekends, the sound of Derek's voice could be heard instructing the children in backyard activities, his tone shifting from encouraging to sharp when either child failed to meet his expectations. The first signs were subtle. The way Emma would position herself behind Liam whenever their father called for them, the muffled sounds of late-night disciplinary discussions that carried through open windows on warm evenings. The way both children seemed to freeze like startled deer at the sound of their father's car in the driveway. 3 weeks after they moved in, Mrs. Chen brought over a welcome basket filled with homemade cookies and local honey, arriving unannounced at 6:30 p.m. Derek answered the door in his perfectly pressed shirt, but she caught a glimpse of Emma behind, him hurriedly wiping down the kitchen counters with trembling hands, a fresh bruise, partially visible beneath her pushed-up sleeve. Derek smoothly stepped forward, closing the door slightly to block the view. "That's so thoughtful of you," he said, his charm falling into place like a well-worn mask. "We're just finishing up dinner, actually. Emma's quite the little homemaker, takes care of all our meals now." His pride in this fact carried an undercurrent that made Mrs. Chen's smile falter slightly. That night, James lay awake again, listening to the sounds from next door. The sharp crack of what might have been a cabinet closing too hard, or something else entirely. A child's muffled sob, the soft creak of floorboards as someone paced in an upstairs room. He found himself at his window again, watching the shadows play across the neighboring house's walls. In one upper window, a small figure huddled on what appeared to be a window seat. Even from this distance, James could see the silhouette of a child's hand pressed against the glass, as if reaching out into the night for help that never came. The scene triggered something in James's memory, a long-buried image of another child at another window years ago. His hand unconsciously moved to the center drawer of his bedside table, where his professional license lay surrendered. a constant reminder of his greatest failure. In the dark quiet of his bedroom, the weight of that old briefcase in his attic seemed to press down through the ceiling, its contents calling out with voices he'd spent years trying to silence. But this time, instead of retreating from the window, James stood his ground, watching. And as the night deepened around him, something shifted in his carefully ordered world, a crack in the walls he'd built around himself, through which the sounds of children in pain began to seep, carrying with them the first stirrings of a long-dormant sense of professional responsibility. May arrived in Oakridge with an unseasonable heat wave that forced windows open and brought neighbors out onto their porches in the evenings. For James Reynolds, these warm nights meant his carefully maintained isolation was harder to preserve. The sounds from the winter's house next door became impossible to ignore, forcing their way through his open windows like unwelcome guests. The first incident that caught the neighborhood's attention happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma was absent from school, and when she returned the next day, she wore a long-sleeved cardigan despite the 90-degree heat. Her explanation about falling from a tree in the backyard was delivered with practiced precision, but her teacher, Ms. Jordan, noticed how the girl's hands trembled as she handed in her homework. "I've seen this before," Ms. Jordan confided to Mrs. Chen during their weekly book club meeting at the Sunshine Cafe. 19 years of teaching, you develop a sense for these things. She stirred her coffee absently, the spoon clinking against the ceramic in rhythm with her worried thoughts. Her writing assignments are troubling too, all about characters who hide, who can't speak up, who are trapped in situations they can't escape. Mrs. Chen nodded, thinking about what she'd observed over the past weeks. The boy, Liam, he hides behind their recycling bins every Thursday morning until his sister comes outside to walk to school. Last week I heard Derek shouting about some broken glass, the things he said. She shuddered, leaving the rest unspoken. James, sitting in his usual booth by the window, pretending to focus on his crossword puzzle, absorbed every word. He'd noticed his own growing catalogue of concerning signs. The way Emma would freeze mid-step at the sound of a car door slamming, the mysterious disappearance of a stray cat the children had been feeding after Derek complained about animal hair on the porch, the increasingly frequent sounds of discipline that carried through the walls late at night. On a particularly hot afternoon, James was deadheading his roses when he overheard a conversation between Derek and Emma in their backyard. The girl had apparently tracked mud into the house after school. "What's our rule about cleanliness, Emma?" Derek's voice carried the false patience that James recognized from certain personality types, the calm before the storm. "Keep everything perfect, Daddy," Emma's reply was barely audible. "And what happens when we break rules?" "We learn our lesson, Daddy." The sound of a belt being removed from loops made James's pruning shears slip, drawing blood from his thumb. He stood frozen, memories flooding back. Another child, another house, another case where he had followed protocol instead of his instincts, with catastrophic results. Later that evening, James noticed Emma limping slightly as she took out the trash. The girl's eyes met his briefly across the driveway, a look so full of silent pain that James had to turn away, his hands shaking as he watered his plants for the third time that day. The neighborhood's response to these accumulating signs followed a familiar pattern. Concerned looks were exchanged over mailboxes. Whispered conversations ended abruptly when Derek appeared. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services were made, but Derek's carefully maintained facade and professional status seemed to deflect any serious investigation. "He's so well-spoken," James overheard one neighbor telling another. "And you can't deny those children are always clean and well-dressed. Maybe we're reading too much into things." But James knew better. He recognized the signs in Emma's perfect posture, not the result of good breeding but of fear. He saw it in Liam's methodical movements, each action calculated to draw minimum attention. These were survival techniques he had documented countless times in his clinical practice. The breaking point came during an outdoor science activity in late May. Miss Jordan's class was studying plant growth, and as Emma reached for a watering can, her sleeve rode up, revealing distinct finger-shaped bruises around her wrist. When Miss Jordan gently questioned her about it, Emma began to cry silently, tears falling without sound, as if she'd learned that even crying had to be done invisibly. That evening, Miss Jordan called Child Protective Services again, this time with detailed documentation of every concerning incident she'd observed over the past months. She also reached out to Mrs. Chen, who had become an unofficial guardian angel to the Winters children, often leaving snacks in her mailbox that Liam would quietly collect after school. "Something has to be done," Miss Jordan insisted, her voice breaking with emotion. "These children are disappearing before our eyes." The irony wasn't lost on James, who overheard this conversation while pretending to check his mail. He'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of disappearing, of making himself invisible to avoid confronting his past failure. But now, watching these children employ the same techniques, he felt something shifting inside him, a wall beginning to crumble. That night, the sounds from the Winters house were worse than usual. A sharp crack followed by a muffled cry. The sound of something, or someone hitting a wall. Then Liam's voice, unusually loud. "Leave her alone. She's just a little kid." James stood at his window, his body rigid with indecision. The briefcase in his attic seemed to pulse with dark energy, its contents a testament to what happens when professionals look away, when they choose protocol over protection. In his mind, he heard the voice of his former supervisor from all those years ago. "We have procedures for a reason, Dr. Reynolds. Not every concerning situation is an emergency." But as another cry pierced the night, James realized with stunning clarity that he was no longer that cautious psychologist bound by institutional procedures. He was a man who had survived professional disgrace, who had built a life of careful control and safety, and perhaps that safety had become its own kind of prison, one that kept him from doing what he wished he had done 15 years ago. His hand reached for the phone, then stopped. No, this time a phone call wouldn't be enough. This time someone needed to do more than just report and hope. The weight of his own past pressed down on him, but for the first time in 15 years, instead of crushing him, it felt like armor, protection forged in the fires of his own failure, now giving him the strength to act. Tomorrow, he decided, he would break his routine. Tomorrow, he would speak to the children directly. The thought made his hands tremble, but he squared his shoulders, standing straighter than he had in years. Sometimes, he realized, the only way to heal old wounds is to prevent new ones from being inflicted. In the darkness of his bedroom, James Reynolds made a promise not just to the children next door, but to the ghost of the child he had failed years ago. This time would be different. This time, someone would stand up and say, "Enough." The evening that changed everything began like any other May night in Oakridge. James Reynolds had just finished his evening routine. Dishes washed and put away by 7:15, thermostat set to 72 degrees, curtains drawn against the gathering darkness outside. A steady rain had been falling since late afternoon, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. At precisely 8:47 p.m., the sound that would shatter his carefully maintained world came. 3 sharp, desperate knocks on his front door. James froze in his leather armchair, his worn copy of Yalom's Existential Psychotherapy falling forgotten to his lap. In 15 years of living on Maple Avenue, no one had ever knocked on his door after sunset. His heart hammered against his ribs as he rose slowly, muscles tense with years of ingrained caution. Through the rain-streaked window beside his door, he could make out a small figure on his porch. Emma Winters stood there, shivering in pajamas soaked through by the rain, her dark braids plastered to her face, bare feet muddy from the yard between. Their houses. But it was her eyes that stopped James's breath, wide with terror yet burning with a desperate determination he recognized from his years counseling children in crisis. "Please," she whispered as he opened the door, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Please help. He's hurting Liam really bad this time." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of secrets finally spoken aloud. Water dripped from Emma's clothes onto James's immaculate hardwood floor, forming small puddles that in any other moment would have sent him rushing for a towel. But now he could only stare at the angry red mark blooming across her cheek and the way she cradled her left arm against her body. "Daddy locked Liam in the basement," Emma continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Liam broke his special watch, the one Mummy gave him. Daddy's been drinking since he got home, and he made Liam kneel in the corner, and then he started hitting him with his belt." James's mind raced through his options, each one seeming more impossible than the last. Call the police? Derek Winters would have Liam cleaned up and hidden before they arrived, just like all the other times Child Protective Services had investigated. Run next door himself? The thought made his knees weak with remembered professional boundaries and the weight of his past failure. But then Emma said something that shattered his paralysis. "I tried to stop him, but he locked the door. Liam was screaming earlier, but now he's quiet. He's too quiet." The words struck James like a physical blow, triggering a memory he'd buried so deep he thought it lost forever. The testimony he'd given at his licensing board hearing. The absence of sound following prolonged distress in a child subject to abuse is not a sign of resolution, but of dangerous psychological or physical submission. It is, in fact, when the screaming stops that we should be most concerned. His own professional words, spoken too late to save another child years ago, now echoed in his mind with terrible clarity. "I'll help," he heard himself say, the words coming from someplace deeper than thought. "But first, you need to tell me exactly what's happening right now." Emma's explanation came in quick, terrified bursts. Derek had been drinking since coming home from work, angry about a failed sales pitch. Liam had accidentally knocked over and broken an expensive watch while trying to avoid his father's reach. The punishment had started with kneeling in the corner, escalated to the belt, and then moved to something worse when Liam had cried out too loudly. "He's got him locked in the basement storage room," Emma finished, her small body shaking with cold and fear. "He keeps saying he's going to teach Liam what real pain is, that he's going to break him of his weakness once and for all." James felt something shift inside him, a final wall crumbling, a chain breaking. The carefully constructed fortress of his routine, built over 15 years to keep the world at bay, suddenly felt like a prison he could no longer bear. "Call Mrs. Chen," he instructed Emma, his voice steadier than he felt. "Tell her to contact the police. Tell them there's a child in immediate danger." He picked up his own phone quickly, dialing 911 himself, but the line was busy, likely due to accidents from the storm. Thunder crashed overhead as James grabbed his raincoat and a heavy flashlight he kept by his back door. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a disgraced child psychologist who had spent 15 years hiding from his past, preparing to confront someone else's demons. "Stay here," he told Emma firmly. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but the police or Mrs. Chen." But Emma shook her head, rainwater flying from her braids. "No, he's my brother. I'm coming with you." Looking at her face, so young yet so determined, James saw a reflection of all the children he'd tried to help over his career. and the one he'd failed most catastrophically. "Okay," he said softly, "but you stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me." Emma nodded, her chin set in a way that made her look older than her 7 years. Together, they stepped out into the rain, moving quickly across the wet grass toward the Winters house. Through the basement window, they could hear Derek Winters' voice, slurred but menacing. "Get up, boy! Get up and take it like a man!" James's hands shook as he tried the basement door, finding it locked. But 15 years of maintaining his own home had taught him about old houses like these. He knew the basement windows of these 1950s colonials all had the same type of latch and the same weakness. As he worked to pry open the window, James felt the weight of his past pressing down on him, but for the first time in 15 years, instead of paralyzing him, it drove him forward. Because this time, he wasn't a helpless observer bound by institutional protocols. This time he had the power to stop it. And as thunder rolled overhead and rain soaked through his clothes, James Reynolds prepared to confront not just Derek Winters, but the ghosts of his own past that had haunted him for so long. Trying to save Liam, he might finally find the courage to forgive himself. The basement of the Winters house smelled like all old basements: damp concrete, musty cardboard, and the metallic tang of rusted pipes. But tonight there was another scent in the air, one that James recognized immediately from his years working with victims of abuse. Fear mixed with something copper-sweet that made his stomach turn. The window latch gave way with a soft click that seemed deafening in the storm-muffled darkness. James eased himself through first, 15 years of sedentary living making the movement awkward. His feet found purchase on an old workbench, and he helped Emma through after him, their movements covered by the rumbling thunder outside. The main basement was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Empty whiskey bottles littered the ground, their glass surfaces gleaming dully in the weak light. A trail of scattered toys led to a closed door at the far end of the room, the storage area Emma had mentioned. Derek Winters' voice carried through. The door, thick with alcohol and rage. "Recite it again," he demanded. Liam's response was barely audible, his voice raw. "I'm sorry for being weak. I'm sorry for being clumsy. I'm sorry for disappointing you." The words were cut off by the sharp crack of something striking flesh. James's hands tightened on his flashlight until his knuckles showed white. Behind him, Emma made a small, choked sound, the sound of a child who had learned to swallow her terror. "Stay here," he whispered to Emma, positioning her behind a stack of moving boxes they still hadn't unpacked. "If anything happens, run to Mrs. Chen's house." Moving as quietly as his trembling legs would allow, James approached the storage room door. Years of clinical practice had taught him the power of words, how to use them to reach troubled minds and hearts. Maybe he could talk Derek down, reason with him. "Mr. Winters," he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is James Reynolds from next door. I need to speak with you." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Liam's muffled whimpers. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps, and the door flew open. Derek Winters filled the doorframe, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes glazed with alcohol and rage. The leather belt in his hand was doubled over, its buckle dark with what James refused to identify. "This is none of your business, old man," Derek snarled, alcohol heavy on his breath. "This is a family matter. My son needs to learn." "Learn what?" James interrupted, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. "Learn that strength comes from fear. Learn that love means pain. I know those lessons too, Mr. Winters. They're lies." Derek's face contorted. "You don't know anything about my family, about raising a boy to be a man." "I know everything about it," James cut in. "I spent 20 years studying the psychology of abuse. I know about basements and belts and lessons that leave scars that never heal. I know about fathers who mistake cruelty for discipline. His voice cracked slightly. And I know about little boys who grow up believing they deserved it. Through the open door, James could see Liam huddled in the corner, blood seeping through. His torn pajama shirt, his arms wrapped protectively around his knees. The sight ignited something in James, a fury that burned away 15 years of caution and professional detachment. Derek lunged forward suddenly, the belt whistling through the air. James moved with a speed he didn't know he possessed, the heavy flashlight coming up to catch the strike. The impact jarred his arms, but he held firm. "Emma, get your brother," he shouted, maintaining eye contact with Derek. She darted past them, quick as a shadow. Derek tried to turn, but James pressed forward, forcing him to step back. "Touch either of them again," James said, his voice low and dangerous, "and I'll show you what real consequences look like." Derek's response was a wordless roar as he charged forward, alcohol destroying any semblance of control. They crashed into the workbench, tools clattering to the floor. James felt a sharp pain as something struck his ribs, but he held his ground. Behind him, he could hear Emma helping Liam to his feet. "Run!" James commanded, blocking another wild swing from Derek. Mrs. Chen's house. The sound of feet on stairs, a door opening and closing. Derek howled in rage, shoving James aside to lunge toward the staircase. But years of alcohol abuse had taken their toll on his coordination. He stumbled, crashing into the basement wall. That's when the blue and red lights began flashing through the basement windows, accompanied by the blessed sound of sirens. Mrs. Chen had come through. "Police! Open up!" The voice from above was authoritative, professional. Derek straightened, his face suddenly shifting into his public mask. But the transformation was imperfect this time, cracked by alcohol and exposure. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began, his words slurring slightly. "I was just disciplining my son." "Save it for your lawyer," James cut in, his voice thick with disgust. "Some lessons need to end." The basement door crashed open, flashlight beams cutting through the dim light. Two officers descended the stairs, followed by medical first responders. James stepped back, letting them take control of the situation, watching as they handcuffed Derek Winters, the man who believed, like so many abusers James had evaluated over his career, that breaking children made them stronger. As they led Derek away, James caught a glimpse of his face. For a moment, beneath the rage and the alcohol, he saw something else, a flicker of the frightened boy Derek must once have been, learning these same brutal lessons in some other basement long ago. The recognition didn't bring forgiveness, but it brought understanding. The cycle of abuse was a chain stretching back through generations. Tonight, at least in this house on this rainy May evening, that chain had finally been broken. Climbing the basement stairs on shaking legs, James emerged into a chaos of emergency lights and concerned neighbors. Through the rain, he could see Emma and Liam huddled together on Mrs. Chen's porch, wrapped in blankets, safe at last. And for the first time in 15 years, James Reynolds felt the weight of his past failure begin to lift, replaced by something he had almost forgotten existed: hope. The fluorescent lights of Oakridge Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across Emma and Liam's faces as they sat in the emergency room's examination area. Dawn was breaking outside, but in the windowless space, time seemed suspended in an artificial twilight. James sat nearby in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his own ribs wrapped in fresh bandages, watching as Detective Marcus Dawson carefully documented Liam's injuries. "Can you tell me how long this has been happening?" Detective Dawson asked softly, his gentle manner a stark contrast to his imposing physical presence. He'd been called in specifically for cases involving children, and his expertise showed in every careful question and patient pause. Emma, still wearing the oversized police department sweatshirt they'd given her, kept one hand firmly on her brother's shoulder as she spoke. "Since Mommy went away. That's what Daddy always said, that she went away. But I heard him on the phone once, saying she wouldn't be coming back ever." Liam hadn't spoken since they'd left the basement. The doctor had documented his injuries with clinical precision. Bruised ribs, lacerations from the belt, deep tissue bruising on his knees from kneeling for hours, dehydration. But it was the older scars they found that told the longer story. Healed fractures that had never been properly treated, burn marks that had been explained away as accidents. Gabriela Ramirez, the senior social worker assigned to their case, sat across from James, her tablet filled with notes that painted a disturbing picture. "Mr. Winters maintained an impressive facade," she explained quietly. "High-paying job, active in the community, no criminal record. He even volunteered for the children's charity golf tournament quarterly. It's a common pattern with abusers of his type. They build a public persona that makes allegations seem impossible." James nodded, remembering the countless case studies he'd reviewed during his career. "What happens to them now?" he asked, watching Emma carefully help Liam sip some water. Gabriela's expression softened. "That's the immediate challenge. We found no records of a Caroline Winters dying in the past 2 years. In fact, we found evidence suggesting she may have fled after a domestic violence incident that put her in the hospital. There's an active missing persons case, but she hasn't been located. Without family members able to take immediate custody, they would typically enter the foster care system." The words hit James like a physical blow. He knew the statistics on children in the system, especially siblings who often faced separation. The thought of Emma and Liam being placed in different homes made his throat tighten. "They can't be separated," he found himself saying. "Liam needs his sister. She's been protecting him all this time." Gabriela studied him thoughtfully. "There is another option," she said carefully. "Temporary emergency guardianship. It would require someone willing to take responsibility for both children while the legal situation is sorted out. Someone with a stable home, no criminal record, and the capacity to provide appropriate care and support." The implication hung in the air between them. James's hands began to tremble slightly. Him, a guardian. The idea seemed absurd. He was a solitary man who had deliberately arranged his life to avoid precisely this kind of responsibility. His house was a carefully maintained fortress of solitude, not a home for traumatized children. But then Liam looked up, meeting James's eyes for the first time since the basement. In that gaze, James saw something he recognized, a mixture of fear and hope. The same expression he'd seen in countless children during his clinical practice. Children wondering if anyone would ever truly see them, truly help. "What would I need to do?" he heard himself ask. The next hours passed in a blur of paperwork and evaluations. James's background was scrutinized, his former career as a respected child psychologist, his financial stability, his clean criminal record. His home would need to be inspected, and he would need to attend specialized training for foster parents dealing with trauma cases. The responsibilities seemed overwhelming. "Are you sure about this?" Mrs. Chen asked when she brought him fresh clothes at the hospital. "It's a huge commitment, James. These children will need so much." James watched Emma reading softly to Liam from a book someone had brought, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I'm not sure of anything," he admitted, "except that I can't let them disappear into the system. I can't let them face this alone. Not when I have the training to help them and the space to keep them together." Detective Dawson pulled him aside before he left. "We found evidence on Winter's computer suggesting the mother may have been trying to leave with the children. There are emails threatening her and financial records showing he's been hiding assets. Combined with the physical abuse charges and photographic evidence, he's looking at significant prison time. The children will be safe from him." But safety from harm, James knew, was only the beginning. The harder work would be helping them feel safe enough to heal, to trust, to believe in the possibility of a different kind of life. As evening approached, Gabriela Ramirez returned with preliminary guardianship papers. "This is temporary," she explained. 90 days initially, subject to review and extension. You'll have support, trauma counseling for the children, regular check-ins, resources for adapting your home and routine. James signed where indicated, his signature steadier than his internal trembling. Emma watched him with those two eyes of hers, still protecting Liam, still carrying too much on her young shoulders. "I have rules too," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but firm. "We stay together. No locked doors, no dark basements." She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "And Liam gets to keep his drawings. Dad said they made him weak, but they don't. They help him feel better." James met her gaze, recognizing the strength it took to make demands when life had taught you to expect punishment for speaking up. "Agreed," he said solemnly. "And I have a rule too. In my house, strength isn't measured by how much pain you can take or give. It's measured by how much you can care, how much you can heal." Liam stirred at this, looking up from the sketch pad someone had given him, where he'd been drawing what appeared to be a garden. "Like your flowers?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. James felt something in his chest crack and warm, like spring sunlight breaking through ice. "Yes," he said softly. "Exactly like that. Growing things need care and patience and gentle hands. People do too." The magnitude of what he was undertaking hit him then, the responsibility, the challenge, the complete upheaval of his carefully ordered life. But watching Emma finally allow herself to lean against his chair, exhaustion overtaking her vigilance, and seeing Liam add careful strokes of color to his garden drawing, James realized that maybe this was what his life had been, preparing him for all along. Sometimes, he thought, the best way to heal old wounds is to help others heal theirs. Sometimes the family you need finds you when you're finally ready to be found. The first week in James's house was a careful dance of adjustment and unspoken fears. His study, hastily converted into a bedroom for Liam, still smelled of old psychology books and leather, though now child-sized clothing hung neatly in the closet where academic journals had once been stored. Emma occupied the guest room, which she'd examined with military precision before allowing Liam to step inside, checking windows, locks, and potential escape routes, a habit that made James's heart ache. "The doors don't lock from the outside," he assured them that first morning, demonstrating with each bedroom door. "And you can leave them open at night if you want. There's a nightlight in the hallway, and this," he handed each of them a small flashlight, "is for if you ever feel scared in the dark." Small changes appeared throughout the house. 2 new toothbrushes in the bathroom, booster steps by the kitchen sink, a stack of children's books on the coffee table. James found himself adapting his precise routines to accommodate his young charges, learning to measure time, not by his grandfather clock's chimes, but by new rhythms, school drop-offs, lunch preparations, homework sessions. The nightmares started on the 3rd night. Liam's screams pierced the quiet house at 2:17 a.m., sending James rushing to his room. He found Emma already there, singing softly to her brother, her own face wet with tears. "He dreams about the basement," she whispered, not meeting James's eyes. "About being locked in the dark." James nodded, understanding all too well. His own nightmares had returned. Memories of the case that had ended his career, the child he'd failed to save by following protocol instead of instinct. That night, he sat in the hallway between their rooms until dawn, a silent guardian against the darkness. The breakthrough with Liam came unexpectedly through James's garden. The boy had been watching from the kitchen window as James tended his tomato plants, his small face pressed against the glass. When James invited him outside, Liam approached the garden beds with the caution of a wild animal ready to bolt at any sudden movement. "Would you like to help me plant these seeds?" James asked, holding out a handful of marigold seeds. "They'll grow into bright orange and yellow flowers that keep the bugs away from the vegetables." Liam's hands trembled as he took a few seeds, but his touch was gentle. Together, they dug small holes in the soft earth, James explaining how the seeds needed to be placed just so, how they required patience and care to grow properly. "Like people?" Liam asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. James's hands stilled in the dirt. "Yes," he answered carefully, "exactly like people. Sometimes the most beautiful things need time and gentleness to grow strong." After that, the garden became their shared sanctuary. Liam would spend hours helping James tend the plants, gradually beginning to speak more, asking questions about each flower, each tool. He started bringing his sketchbook outside, filling pages with detailed drawings of blooming marigolds and ripening tomatoes. Emma's trust came more slowly, built in quiet moments and careful observations. She watched James like a hawk, noting how he never raised his voice, how he telegraphed his movements clearly, how he asked permission before entering their spaces. She maintained her protective stance over Liam, but gradually began to show small signs of relaxing her vigilance. The first time she fell asleep on the living room couch while reading, James covered her with a blanket and retreated quietly, recognizing the profound trust in that moment of vulnerability. The next morning, she made them all toast for breakfast. Slightly burned, but offered with shy pride. Their trauma counselor, Dr. Sarah Finch, came twice a week, meeting with each child individually and then together. She helped James understand the complexity of their healing process. "They're testing you," she explained during one of their consultation sessions. "Every kind act, every gentle response to a mistake, every fulfilled promise, these are all building blocks of trust. But they're also waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the mask to fall away." James understood this intimately. "Like I did with my patients," he acknowledged, "always watching for the signs of danger, for the moment when safety turns to threat." Dr. Finch nodded. "The fact that you understand this from professional experience can be a powerful tool for connection, but it also means you need to be mindful of your own triggers and healing process." She was right. James found himself confronting his own past failure as he helped the children navigate their trauma. Each time Liam flinched at a sudden movement, each time Emma checked the locks before bed, he remembered the case that had ended his career. The child he'd reported to the proper authorities instead of acting more decisively. The child who hadn't. Survived while the system slowly turned its wheels. But there were moments of progress that made his heart swell, like when Liam left his first drawing on James's nightstand, a careful sketch of the garden with 3 figures tending it together, or when Emma finally asked for help with her math homework instead of struggling alone, trusting that mistakes wouldn't be met with punishment. The house itself seemed to transform, warming to the presence of children. The silence that had once felt protective now gave way to the sounds of life. Cartoon shows on Saturday mornings, the scrape of chairs at mealtimes, muffled giggles during bedtime stories. One evening, about 3 weeks after they'd moved in, James was preparing dinner when he heard something extraordinary. Laughter. Real, unguarded laughter. Following the sound to the living room, he found Emma and Liam building an elaborate fort. Out of couch cushions and blankets, their faces flushed with genuine joy. They froze when they noticed him, old fears flickering across their faces. But James simply smiled and asked, "Would you like some pillows from the guest room for structural support?" The relief in their eyes made his throat tight. That night, they all ate dinner in the fort, breaking James's long-standing rule about food in the living room. As they sat cross-legged on blankets, sharing stories and pizza, he realized that some rules were meant to be broken, especially in service of healing. Later, helping Emma wash dishes, Liam had been appointed official dryer. James caught her watching him with a thoughtful expression. "You understand, don't you?" she asked suddenly. "About before. About him." James dried his hands carefully, giving her question the weight it deserved. "Yes," he said simply. "I understand because I spent my career helping children who lived through it too." She nodded, processing this. "But you never did it. You never hurt anyone." "No," James confirmed, "but I made a different mistake once. I saw the signs that a child was in danger, and I followed the rules instead of my instincts. I reported it to the authorities and waited for the system to work, but it didn't work fast enough." His voice caught. "I didn't do enough, and a child died. That's why I stopped being a psychologist. That's why I hid in my house for so long." Emma considered this, her young face solemn. "But you didn't hide this time. You came for us." "I did," James agreed, feeling the weight of years of self-recrimination begin to lift. And that's how healing works sometimes. We get a second chance to make a different choice. That night, checking on them before bed, a new routine he'd developed, James found Liam's door open, soft lamplight spilling into the hallway. The boy was adding color to a new drawing, the garden again, but this time the three figures were smiling, surrounded by blooming flowers. "It's us," Liam said softly, not looking up. "In summer, when everything grows bigger." James felt tears prick his eyes, but for the first time in 15 years, they weren't tears of regret. Sometimes he was learning. Healing looked like a child's drawing of tomorrow's garden, full of color and hope and the promise of new growth. The discovery of the briefcase happened on a sunny Saturday in June, 6 weeks after Emma and Liam had come to live with James. They were cleaning the attic, part of Dr. Finch's suggestion to create shared projects that would help them bond as a family, when Emma found it pushed far back under the eaves, covered in 15 years of dust. "What's this?" she asked, pulling it carefully into the light. James felt his heart stop. He knew without looking what the briefcase contained, every item catalogued in his memory, like scenes from a dark play he'd spent a lifetime trying to forget. His hands trembled as he reached for it, but Emma had already lifted the lid. Inside, neatly organized case files from 2009 lay on top, news clippings about a child's death, a photograph face down, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, James's resignation letter to the state licensing board. The headlines jumped out in stark black ink. "Child death raises questions about system failures." "Psychologist surrenders license after investigation. Tyler Davis, age 8, laid to rest." Emma's sharp intake of breath told James she understood. Liam moved closer, peering over his sister's shoulder at the contents. With trembling fingers, Emma lifted one of the news articles, scanning it quickly. "You tried to help him," she said softly. It wasn't a question. James sank heavily onto an old trunk, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "I was Tyler's therapist," he said, his voice rough with memory. "He showed all the signs of severe abuse. I did everything by the book, filed reports, called his caseworker, documented everything. But I didn't do the one thing that might have saved him. I didn't go to his house when he missed our appointment. I didn't insist on seeing him immediately when he stopped coming to school. I trusted the system to work." He reached into the briefcase and carefully unwrapped the photograph, a smiling brown-haired boy with a gap-toothed grin. "They found him 3 days later. His father had..." James couldn't finish the sentence. "After that, I couldn't practice anymore. Not when following the rules had failed so completely. I surrendered my license voluntarily." Emma's hand found his, small fingers squeezing with surprising strength. "But you didn't follow the rules with us," she said. "You came into our house. You fought Dad. You saved Liam." Liam sat cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, pulling his ever-present sketchbook from his backpack. As James and Emma talked, his pencil moved across the paper with quiet purpose. "Is that why you helped us?" Emma asked, her voice carrying an edge of her old wariness. "Because of him? Because you couldn't save him?" James considered this, looking at the photograph he hadn't been able to face for 15 years. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because when I heard Liam in that basement, when I saw you standing on my porch in the rain, I realized something." "What?" Emma's question was barely a whisper. I'd spent so long hiding from my past, building this quiet, safe life, that I'd forgotten what safety is really for. "What do you mean?" Emma's eyes never left his face. "Safety isn't just about walls and locks and routines," James said, finding the words as they came. "Real safety is having the strength to help others when they need it. It's using what you've learned from pain to prevent more pain. It's..." He gestured at the garden visible through the attic window. "It's like the thorns on a rose bush. They exist not just to protect, but to create a safe space for something beautiful to grow." Liam looked up from his drawing then, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. Without a word, he turned his sketchbook around. On the page, he'd drawn two houses side by side. In one, dark shadows loomed over small, huddled figures. In the other, light streamed through windows onto three people tending a garden. But what caught James's breath was the third element, a bridge between the houses made of helping hands reaching out to each other. Emma studied the drawing, then looked back at the contents of the briefcase. "Can I read his story?" she asked, pointing to one of the case files. Maybe it's time somebody remembered him." James's hands shook as he handed her the file. Emma opened it carefully, treating the aged paper with gentle reverence. She read quietly, her young voice steadier than James could have managed. Tyler Davis, age 8, reported signs of physical abuse, including unusual bruising, withdrawal from activities, and statements indicating fear of his father. Initial investigation inconclusive. Follow-up scheduled. When she finished, the attic fell silent except for the sound of birds outside and Liam's pencil still moving across paper. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice thick with emotion but determined. "You kept your promise," she said. "Maybe not to Tyler, but you learned from him. You helped us when no one helped him." James felt something break inside him, not the shattering kind of break, but the kind that lets light through, like a seed breaking free of its shell to reach for the sun. Liam held out his sketchbook again. He'd added to the drawing. On the bridge between the houses, he'd drawn a fourth figure, a small boy with a gap-toothed smile like the one in the photograph. "That's Tyler," he said softly. "He's not forgotten anymore. He's part of the story. Now..." James stared at the drawing, seeing in Liam's art what he'd never been able to express in words. The way past and present flowed together. The way healing happened not in straight lines, but in circles. The way helping others could heal old wounds. "Maybe," Emma said thoughtfully, "we could put Tyler's picture somewhere in the house. Not to make us sad, but to remember that sometimes the worst things can lead to something good if someone's brave enough to make a different choice." That evening, they carefully packed away the old briefcase, but not back under the eaves. Instead, they placed it on a shelf in James's room, alongside Liam's growing collection of garden sketches and Emma's newly started journal. The past wasn't something to hide anymore. It was part of their shared story, a bridge between what was and what could be. As they headed downstairs for dinner, James paused in the doorway, looking back at the shelf. The afternoon light caught the edge of Liam's latest drawing, making the bridge between the houses seem to glow. Sometimes, he realized, the heaviest burdens held not just pain, but also the seeds of healing, waiting for the right moment to grow. June arrived in Oakridge with a gentle warmth that coaxed new blooms from James's garden and new beginnings within his home. The physical wounds from that rainy May night had healed, but the deeper work of emotional recovery continued in ways both subtle and profound. The children's therapist, Dr. Finch, had helped them establish what she called healing rituals, daily practices that gradually replaced old fears with new certainties. Every morning began with safety checks, but not the frantic kind Emma used to perform. Instead, they walked through the house together, opening curtains to let in light, naming the things that made them feel secure. Locked exterior doors, open interior ones, phones charged and ready, the list of emergency contacts on the refrigerator. "It's not about being afraid anymore," Emma explained to Mrs. Chen one morning as they worked together planting summer flowers in pots for the front porch. "It's about knowing we have control over our space, that we can make choices about what makes us feel safe." The garden remained central to their healing process. James taught them about summer care, how plants needed consistent watering during hot spells, how to identify beneficial insects from pests, how pruning encouraged new growth rather than cutting plants back from punishment. "Like us," Liam said one day, carefully removing spent blooms from the marigolds. "We're not being punished when Dr. Finch asks hard questions. We're growing stronger." The comment brought tears to James's eyes, but he kept working, letting Liam lead their quiet garden ritual. The boy who had once flinched at every sudden movement now moved with growing confidence among the summer plants, explaining to James the pictures he planned to draw of the butterflies that visited their flowers. Inside the house, other transformations took place. The formal living room became a space for what Emma called comfort crafts, activities that kept their hands busy and their minds calm. James's old leather armchair now shared space with a child-sized art table where Liam spent hours drawing. Emma discovered knitting, the rhythmic click of needles accompanying their evening reading sessions. The kitchen, once James's sanctuary, of precise measurements and careful timing, became a laboratory of healing through shared meals. Liam, it turned out, had a natural talent for baking, approaching recipes with the same careful attention he gave to his art. Emma excelled at savory dishes, gradually overcoming her fear of kitchen knives under James's patient guidance. "Cooking is about trust," James told them one Sunday morning as they made pancakes together. "Trust in the process, trust in each other, trust that mistakes can be fixed." When Liam accidentally spilled blueberries all over the counter, James simply handed him a cloth and helped clean up, showing through actions what words alone couldn't convey. That accidents didn't lead to punishment here. Their academic progress reflected their emotional healing. Liam's summer school art teacher reported a dramatic shift in his drawings, the dark, cramped spaces giving way to open landscapes and bright colors. Emma's writing, once filled with themes of imprisonment and escape, began exploring ideas of growth and transformation. But healing wasn't linear. There were still difficult days, moments when past trauma cast long shadows over present peace. Liam still had nightmares that sent him seeking refuge in Emma's room. Emma still struggled with hypervigilance, especially around adult men who reminded her of their father. One particularly challenging day came when they received news that Derek Winters had pleaded guilty to multiple charges, accepting a plea deal that would keep him in prison for at least 12 years. The children's reaction surprised James. Instead of relief, they experienced a complex mix of emotions that manifested in various ways. Emma spent hours aggressively cleaning her room, a behavior Dr. Finch explained as an attempt to establish control. Liam stopped speaking entirely for 2 days, communicating only through his drawings. James found himself returning to his own coping mechanisms, checking locks repeatedly, struggling to sleep. But they faced these challenges together, developing new strategies for helping each other through dark moments. They created what Liam called their comfort cave, a refined version of their blanket fort that became their refuge during difficult times. Inside, they would share stories, draw pictures, or simply sit in companionable silence, understanding that healing sometimes meant just being present for each other. The neighborhood, which had once whispered about the winter's children in concerned tones, now played a vital role in their recovery. Mrs. Chen became a regular presence, teaching Emma how to make her famous almond cookies and praising Liam's artistic progress. The local librarian set aside new art books for Liam and mystery novels for Emma. Even the mail carrier learned to announce his presence clearly before approaching the house, understanding the children's need for predictability. James found himself healing alongside them, confronting his own past failure as he helped them navigate their trauma. He started attending a support group for professionals who'd experienced burnout after difficult cases, sharing his story for the first time in decades. The experience was both terrifying and liberating, much like the day he decided to help two frightened children on a rainy night. One evening, as summer reached its fullest expression, James found Emma sitting in the sunroom watching fireflies dance in the garden twilight. She was working on a knitting project, a scarf in shades of blue and green that reminded him of a peaceful river. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," she said without preamble, her needles moving steadily. "But it's not about forgetting, is it? It's about growing something new in the spaces where the hurt used to be." James sat beside her, watching the fireflies transform their garden into a magical space of moving light. "Yes," he agreed softly. "And sometimes the strongest things grow from the deepest wounds." Liam appeared then, carrying his sketchbook and a mug of hot chocolate topped with the miniature marshmallows that had become his signature touch. He settled on the floor between them, opening to a fresh page. "I'm drawing our garden at night, with the fireflies," he announced, his pencil moving with sure strokes, "to show how sometimes light comes from unexpected places." As the fireflies continued their luminous dance and the grandfather clock chimed softly in the background, the three of them sat together in comfortable silence, each working on their own form of creation. Emma's knitting, Liam's drawing, James's quiet presence. They were learning day by day that healing wasn't just about mending what was broken, but about building something new from the pieces. The search for Caroline Winters began with a single photograph discovered hidden inside Emma's stuffed rabbit. During a routine washing of the well-loved toy, now missing an ear, but still Emma's nightly companion, James found a small zippered compartment in the rabbit's back. Inside was a folded photograph of a slender woman with Emma's dark hair and Liam's serious eyes, embracing both children in front of what appeared to be a mountain lake. "Mom hid it there," Emma explained when James gently asked about it. "The day before she disappeared. She said no matter what happened, we should remember she loved us and would find us again someday." The photograph became the starting point for Detective Dawson's renewed investigation. Database searches and facial recognition technology identified Caroline Mitchell Winters in a domestic violence shelter intake file from Tacoma, Washington, dated 3 years earlier. The trail went cold after she left the shelter, but the photo provided new hope and raised new questions about what had really happened to the children's mother. "We think your father may have told you she abandoned you to make you feel like he was all you had," Detective Dawson explained to the children, during a gentle interview at James's home, rather than the police station. "It's a common tactic abusers use to isolate their victims." "He said she didn't want us anymore," Liam whispered, his eyes on the photograph they now kept framed on the living room bookshelf. "That she found a new family that didn't have weak, disappointing kids like us." James felt a surge of anger, toward Derek Winters, not just for the physical abuse, but for this deeper psychological cruelty. "That was another lie," he said firmly. "Your mother was trying to protect you. Sometimes adults who are being hurt themselves don't have good choices." The investigation uncovered disturbing evidence that Derek had systematically alienated Caroline from her support network, moving the family repeatedly, controlling access to vehicles and finances, and eventually escalating to physical violence. Police reports from 3 different states showed a pattern of domestic disturbances that never resulted in charges, until Caroline disappeared and Derek moved with the children to Oakridge for his fresh start. "We're working with the FBI now," Detective Dawson told James privately. "Cell phone records from 3 years ago show her last known location near the Oregon-California border. Given Winter's background and the physical evidence we found in the house basement, we're treating this as a potential homicide, though we haven't shared that with the children yet." The news hit James hard. He had been hoping for a reunification story, the missing mother found, the family made whole again, in a way his clinical experience told him rarely happened in real life. The possibility that Caroline might never return meant that Emma and Liam's healing journey would be even more complex. Dr. Finch helped him navigate these difficult conversations with the children. "They need honesty wrapped in hope," she advised. "Acknowledge the uncertainty without taking away the possibility of a positive outcome. And most importantly, reassure them that no matter what happened to their mother, it wasn't because she didn't love them." That evening, James sat with Emma and Liam in the garden, the photograph of Caroline placed carefully on the small table between them. The summer air was thick with the scent of lavender and the distant sound of neighborhood children playing. "Detective Dawson is doing everything possible to find your mom," James began, choosing his words carefully. "But I want you to know something important. Whatever happened, whether we find her or not, you have a home here for as long as you need or want it." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "What if they never find her? What if she can't come back?" James took a deep breath. "Then we'll honor her memory by living the life she wanted for you, one filled with safety and love and the freedom to become yourselves. But we won't give up hope, not yet." Liam leaned against James's side, a gesture of trust that still surprised him each time it happened. "Can we help look for her? I could draw pictures of her for the police." "That's a wonderful idea," James said, feeling a swell of pride at Liam's desire to contribute. "And Emma, perhaps you could write down any memories of places your mom mentioned liking, or where you visited together as a family. Those might give Detective Dawson new leads." As July turned to August, the children threw themselves into Operation Find Mom, with a determination that both warmed and worried James. He wanted to encourage their hope while preparing them for the possibility of disappointment, a delicate balance he discussed regularly with Dr. Finch. "They're reclaiming agency," she explained during their weekly consultation. "After years of feeling powerless in an abusive home, they're taking action. It's healing, regardless of the outcome." Emma created a detailed timeline of everywhere. They had lived with both parents, complete with descriptions of neighbors and friends her mother had been close to before her father isolated them. Liam produced increasingly detailed drawings of Caroline based on the single photograph and his memories, which Detective Dawson circulated to law enforcement agencies across the western states. It was Liam's drawing that ultimately led to the breakthrough. A park ranger at Crater Lake National Park recognized Caroline's distinctive features in the age progression sketch Liam had created with the help of a police artist. The ranger recalled helping a woman matching her description who had camped at the park 3 summers earlier. A woman who had seemed nervous, repeatedly checking her surroundings, paying only in cash. "She was heading south," the ranger reported. "She mentioned Something about starting over in a place where the mountains meet the ocean. This thin lead expanded when Detective Dawson discovered a woman named Carol Mitchell, Caroline's maiden name with a slight alteration, working as a bookkeeper at a small resort in Northern California. The resort sat at the foot of coastal mountains that dropped dramatically to the Pacific, exactly where the mountains meet the ocean. "We're sending officers to make contact," Detective Dawson told James, his typically professional demeanor showing rare excitement. "We're proceeding, with caution in case it's not her or in case there's a reason she's hiding. We don't want to expose her location if she's still afraid of winters." James wrestled with whether to tell the children about this development. After consulting with Dr. Finch, they decided to share only that there was a potential lead without specifics that might build up expectations too high. "The police think they might have found someone who knew your mom," James told them carefully. "They're checking it out right now." Even this measured disclosure sent waves of emotion through the household. Emma vacillated between frenetic energy, reorganizing her room, planning what she would say if it really was her mother, and periods of quiet withdrawal when the possibility of disappointment became too overwhelming. Liam channeled his feelings into an explosion of artwork, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with scenes of family reunions in various settings. James found himself equally conflicted. The children's bond with their mother, even in her long absence, was powerful and primal. If Caroline was alive and well, what would that mean for the fragile family they had built together? As much as he wanted the children to have their mother back, the thought of losing them made his chest tighten with a grief he hadn't anticipated. The answer came on a fog-shrouded morning in late August. James was helping the children pack their backpacks for the first day of school, Emma entering 3rd grade, Liam starting 5th, when Detective Dawson's car pulled into the driveway. He wasn't alone. A slender woman with dark hair threaded with silver stepped out of the passenger side, her movements tentative, her eyes scanning the house with a mixture of hope and terror. Emma saw her first through the front window. The backpack fell from her hands, her whole body going still with disbelief. "Mom?" The word was barely a whisper. Then Liam was at the window too, his face transformed by a joy so pure it hurt to witness. "Mom!" His voice broke through the paralysis, and both children bolted for the door. James stood frozen in the hallway, watching through the open door as Carolyn Winters, now Caroline Mitchell again, fell to her knees on the front walk, gathering her children into her arms with a sob that seemed to contain 3 years of anguish and relief. "My babies, my beautiful babies," she kept repeating, her hands touching their faces as if to assure herself they were real. "I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped trying to find you." Detective Dawson caught James's eye over the reunion, giving him a nod that conveyed volumes. This was real. This was happening. The miracle they had hardly dared hope for had materialized on his front lawn. James felt a complex wave of emotions, joy for the children, relief that their mother had survived, and an ache of impending loss that he immediately felt guilty for experiencing. This moment wasn't about him. It was about 3 people finding their way back to each other after years of forced separation. Caroline looked up then, her tear-streaked face turning toward James. "You're Dr. Reynolds," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Detective Dawson told me what you did for my children. How can I ever thank you for saving them when I couldn't?" It was the children who answered, their voices overlapping in their eagerness to tell their mother about the man who had changed their lives. "He made us feel safe again," Emma said. "He taught me to draw gardens," Liam added, "and he never gets mad when I spill things." "He helped us look for you," Emma continued. "He believed you didn't leave us on purpose, even before we found your picture." Caroline stood slowly, keeping her children close as if afraid they might disappear again. Detective Dawson told me what happened. What my husband... Her voice caught on the word, and she amended, what Derek did after I escaped. I need you to know I tried to take them with me. He caught me packing their things. She stopped, looking down at her children's faces. He made it impossible for me to take them that night. I had to leave to get help, to find a way to prove what was happening and get legal custody. But he disappeared with them before I could file the emergency custody papers. James nodded, hearing the guilt and grief in her voice. You don't need to explain. I understand the impossible choices abuse victims often face. I never stopped searching, Caroline continued, her voice strengthening. I changed my name, got a job where I could search public records and social media for any trace of them. Every time I thought I had a lead, they'd be gone again, until Detective Dawson found me. The children were pulling her toward the house now, eager to show her everything. Liam's artwork covering the refrigerator, Emma's knitting projects arranged on the window seat, the garden where they had begun to heal. Come see our rooms, Emma urged, and the fort we build in the living room, sometimes, and James's garden where we grow vegetables and flowers. Caroline looked at James, a question in her eyes, asking permission to enter the home where her children had found safety. Please, come in, James said, stepping aside. They've been waiting for this moment for a long time. We all have. As the children led their mother through the house, pointing out every detail of their life with James, he stood in the kitchen, giving them space while preparing a pot of tea with hands that trembled slightly. Detective Dawson joined him, accepting a cup with a grateful nod. She's been living under an assumed name in a remote coastal town for nearly 3 years, the detective explained quietly. Working for cash, staying off the grid, afraid he'd find her if she surfaced, all while trying to locate her children. She had no idea he'd been arrested until we found her. What happens now? James asked, the question that had been pressing on his heart since he saw her car pull up. Detective Dawson sighed. Legally, she's their mother and has never been deemed unfit. With Winters in prison and her willingness to press additional charges for what happened the night she fled, there's no legal barrier to her resuming custody. James nodded, his throat tight. He had known this was the most likely outcome if Caroline was found alive, had tried to prepare himself for it, but the reality still hit him with unexpected force. The transition doesn't have to be abrupt, Dawson continued, seeming to read James's thoughts. She'll need time to find housing, get re-established, and the children will need time to adjust. I've suggested she stay locally rather than taking them back to California immediately. From the living room came the sound of laughter, Liam explaining one of his drawings to his mother, his voice animated in a way James had rarely heard. I want what's best for them, James said quietly. They deserve to be with their mother. They also deserve to keep the stability and safety you've provided, Dawson pointed out. This doesn't have to be an either-or situation. Before James could respond, Caroline appeared in the kitchen doorway, her children flanking her like protective escorts. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face showed a determination that reminded him of Emma's expression when she was working through a difficult problem. My children have told me everything you've done for them, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. How you've helped them feel safe again. How you've encouraged Liam's art and Emma's independence. How you've given them a home when they had nowhere else to go. James shook his head slightly. Anyone would have... No, Caroline interrupted, gently. Not anyone would have. Not everyone did. Detective Dawson told me how many people suspected what was happening but didn't intervene. You did. You broke through your own walls to save my children. I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Emma tugged at her mother's hand. Can we show Mom the garden now? The tomatoes are getting ripe. As Caroline followed her children into the backyard, Detective Dawson placed a hand briefly on James's shoulder. This is just the beginning of a new chapter, not the end of the story. Give it time. James watched through the kitchen window as Liam proudly showed his mother the marigolds he had planted, as Emma demonstrated how to check tomatoes for ripeness. Caroline moved with the careful grace of someone handling precious things, her focus entirely on her children, her face alight with a joy that mirrored theirs. The scene should have filled him only with happiness, and mostly it did. But beneath that joy lay a current of loss, not just for himself, but for the fragile family unit they had created in the wake of trauma. Would the children still need him once they had their mother back? Would there still be a place for him in their lives? As if sensing his thoughts, Emma looked up at the window, caught his eye, and waved urgently for him to join them. "James, come show Mom how the irrigation system works." The invitation, so casual yet so vital, released something in his chest. Whatever shape their relationships took moving forward, the connection they had built these past months was real. It had roots like the plants they tended together, and like those plants, it could adapt and grow in new conditions. James stepped out into the August sunshine, joining the small family circle in the garden where so much healing had already taken place. There would be challenges ahead, legal practicalities, emotional adjustments, new boundaries to establish. But watching Caroline kneel beside Liam to examine a caterpillar on a leaf, seeing Emma's hand slip trustingly into his as they approached, James felt the first stirrings of a new kind of hope. Sometimes family wasn't defined by blood or legal documents. Sometimes it was built through shared trials and mutual healing. Sometimes it expanded in unexpected ways to include all the people who helped each other survive the darkest times. "I was just telling Mom she should stay here while she finds a house nearby," Emma announced, her tone making it clear this was less suggestion than declaration. "There's the pull-out sofa in the office. Then we could all be together while we figure things out." Caroline looked up, her expression uncertain. "We couldn't impose like that, Emma. Dr. Reynolds has already done so much." "James," he corrected gently, "and it's not an imposition, if it's what's best for the children." He met her gaze directly. "They've had enough abrupt transitions in their lives. If staying here while you get settled would make things easier for them, my home is open to you." The relief in Caroline's eyes was answer enough. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for giving me back my children, and for taking care of them when I couldn't." Liam, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "We could all take care of each other now," he suggested, his voice carrying the simple wisdom of a child who had learned that healing happens in community. That's what families do. James felt something settle in his heart as the four of them stood together in the garden he had once tended in solitude. The grandfather clock inside might still mark time in predictable intervals, but the life flowing around it now followed rhythms of healing and growth that couldn't be measured in minutes and hours. Some clocks, he was learning, measured time. In moments of connection, in barriers overcome, in trust rebuilt piece by piece. And by that measure, they were all just beginning. The transition happened more smoothly than any of them had anticipated. September brought cooler nights, golden afternoon light, and a new rhythm to the household on Maple Avenue. Carolyn moved into James's home office, which they transformed into a temporary bedroom with the pull-out sofa, a small dresser from the attic, and a vase of fresh garden flowers that Liam insisted on replacing every few days. The arrangement was meant to be brief, just until Caroline could find suitable housing nearby, but it quickly evolved into something that felt surprisingly natural. The children thrived with their mother's return. Emma's nightmares diminished, replaced by excited morning chatter about school projects and new friends. Liam's art expanded beyond the garden scenes that had dominated his recovery period, now including vibrant landscapes of coastal mountains and ocean views inspired by his mother's stories of her life in Northern California. The first week had been filled with practical matters, Caroline giving formal statements to finalize the case against Derek, meetings with the children's school counselors, medical appointments to establish baseline records for the children's new pediatrician. James had expected to feel increasingly peripheral as Caroline reasserted her role as their mother, but instead found himself included in every decision, every conversation. "Your input matters," Caroline told him one evening as they sat on the back porch while the children finished homework inside. "You've known them these past months in ways I haven't. You understand their healing process." "You're their mother," James replied, watching the sunset paint the garden in amber light. That connection doesn't disappear even after years of separation." Caroline's hands twisted in her lap. "I've missed so much. Their favorite foods, their new interests, the way they've grown. Sometimes I look at them and see strangers wearing my children's faces." "Give it time," James advised gently. "They're still the same children at their core. Emma with her fierce protectiveness, Liam with his sensitive artist's soul. Those essential qualities remain." "That's what gives me hope," Caroline admitted. "That and seeing how they've flourished. In your care, you've given them something I couldn't before, a sense of safety, of stability." James considered this. "Perhaps, but you gave them resilience, the strength to survive until help arrived. That came from you." Their conversation was interrupted by Liam appearing at the door, sketchbook in hand. "I finished my homework. Can I draw the sunset?" "Of course," Caroline and James answered simultaneously, then exchanged small smiles at their synchronicity. As Liam settled at the porch railing, pencils arranged precisely beside him, James observed how he now incorporated techniques James had taught him, measuring proportions with his pencil, studying light patterns before beginning. Yet the artistic sensibility, the way he captured emotion in his landscapes, that had come from Caroline, who James had discovered was an amateur photographer with a remarkable eye for composition. The children were benefiting from their complementary strengths. James provided structure and psychological insight. Caroline offered emotional warmth and shared history. Together, they were creating something neither could have managed alone, a healing environment that addressed the children's complex needs. By the third week, they had established unofficial roles in the household. Caroline managed the morning routine, breakfast preparation, school lunch assembly, last-minute homework checks. James handled afternoons, snack preparation, garden. Time, initial homework supervision. Evenings they shared, taking turns with dinner preparation, while the other helped with more complex homework or simply spent time with the children. "You cook differently than James," Emma observed one night as she helped her mother prepare chicken stir-fry. "He measures everything exactly. You just throw things in." Caroline laughed. "Different approaches, same goal, food that nourishes you. Like raising children," James said from the doorway where he'd been observing them. "Different styles, same purpose." Emma considered this, her expression serious. "Is that why you and Mom don't argue like Dad did with everyone? Because you both want the same things for us?" The question revealed how carefully she still monitored adult interactions, searching for signs of potential conflict. Caroline and James exchanged glances over her head, silently acknowledging the weight of her observation. "Partly," Caroline answered carefully, "but also because we respect each other. Disagreements don't have to be scary or mean. They can be discussions where everyone's viewpoint matters. Like when you wanted to paint your bedroom purple and James thought blue might be calmer for sleep, but you compromised on lavender." Liam piped up from the table where he was setting plates. "Exactly like that," James confirmed, marveling at how closely the children observed their interactions, cataloguing examples of healthy conflict resolution to replace the toxic patterns they'd been exposed to previously. The provisional arrangement extended from weeks into months as autumn settled over Oakridge. Caroline found part-time work as a bookkeeper at a local accounting firm, building her professional credentials again. After years working off the books, the flexible hours allowed her to be home when the children returned from school while providing income she saved toward their future housing. James supported her independence while privately acknowledging how much he'd come to value their shared household. The home that had once felt too large and empty for a solitary man now hummed with life. Morning coffee with Caroline discussing the day ahead, evening stories with the children in the living room, weekend garden projects that had expanded to include a small greenhouse where they could grow seedlings through the approaching winter. Dr. Finch continued meeting with the children, now including Caroline in some sessions to facilitate family healing. During their professional consultations, she noted James's concern about his evolving role. "You're afraid of losing your place in their lives once they move out," she observed during one of their meetings. James nodded. "I know it's selfish. Caroline is their mother. They belong with her." "Family isn't always defined by traditional boundaries," Dr. Finch reminded him. "You've become an important attachment figure for both children. Severing that connection completely would be another loss for them to process." "But what's the alternative? I can't expect Caroline to maintain an artificial relationship for the children's sake. She deserves to rebuild her life on her own terms." Dr. Finch studied him thoughtfully. "Have you discussed this directly with her? Not just the practical matters of housing and schedules, but your mutual hopes for the future?" He hadn't. Despite their daily conversations about the children's needs, school requirements, and household management, they had carefully avoided any discussion of long-term arrangements. It was as if they both feared disrupting the delicate balance they had achieved. That evening, after the children were asleep, James found Caroline in the sunroom, sorting through apartment listings on her laptop. The blue glow of the screen illuminated her focused expression, so similar to Emma's when she tackled a challenging math problem. "Any promising options?" he asked, settling in the armchair opposite her. She sighed, closing the laptop. "A few possibilities, but nothing that feels right yet. Everything either exceeds my budget or is too far from the children's school, or lacks a yard for Liam to garden." Her smile was apologetic. "I know we've extended our welcome far longer than intended." "You haven't," James said quickly, then paused, choosing his next words carefully. "In fact, I've been meaning to discuss something with you. I've noticed how well the children are doing with our current arrangement. The stability seems beneficial for them." Caroline nodded. "I've noticed it too. Emma's teacher mentioned she's participating more in class discussions, and Liam actually volunteered to present his art project to his class, something he never would have done before. Dr. Finch believes maintaining consistent relationships with all their attachment figures is important for their continued healing." James continued, "I'm concerned about disrupting that stability." "So am I," Caroline admitted quietly. "But I can't impose on your generosity indefinitely. You deserve to reclaim your space, your routine." James leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "What if I don't want to go back to that life? What if this—" He gestured to encompass the house, the evidence of shared living visible in children's books on the coffee table, Caroline's photography, magazines beside his psychology journals. "What if this works better for all of us?" Caroline's expression registered surprise, then thoughtful consideration. "Are you suggesting we continue our current living arrangement indefinitely?" "I'm suggesting we consider all options that prioritize the children's well-being while respecting our own needs," James clarified. That might mean you finding a place very nearby with liberal visitation. It might mean converting the attic into a proper apartment for more privacy within this house. It might mean... He hesitated, then continued. It might mean formalizing our partnership in some way, as co-parents if nothing else. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 10 times, its sound carrying through the quiet house. Caroline was silent. For so long that James began to regret raising the subject. I should clarify, he added quickly. I'm not presuming any relationship beyond what we already have. My concern is maintaining stability for Emma and Liam. James, Caroline interrupted. Gently, I understand, and I've been having similar thoughts. She closed her laptop completely, setting it aside. The truth is, I haven't been searching very enthusiastically for alternative housing. Every place I look at feels wrong, not because of the features or location, but because it wouldn't include you. The simple admission shifted something in the atmosphere between them. The children need you, she continued. I've watched how they turn to you for different things than they come to me for. Emma trusts your steadiness. Liam connects with you through art and gardening in ways that are uniquely yours. Removing you from their daily lives would create another loss for them to process. James nodded, relief flooding through him. So we consider this a more permanent arrangement, at least until they're more fully healed? Yes, Caroline agreed, though we might need to reconfigure some spaces for better privacy long-term, and establish more formal boundaries about parental authority, financial responsibilities. Of course, James said quickly. We can work through those details gradually. The important thing is agreeing on the general direction. Caroline smiled, some tension visibly leaving her shoulders. I've been worried about raising this subject with you. I didn't want you to think I was taking advantage. Never, James assured her. If anything, you've given me a second chance at meaningful work. For years I hid from my failure to save one child. Now I get to be part of healing too. It goes both ways, Caroline said softly. You gave me back my children when I thought I'd lost them forever. Whatever shape our family takes going forward, the debt can never be repaid. It's not about debt, James countered. It's about all of us finding healing together. The conversation might have continued, but a small sound from the hallway drew their attention. Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas, her expression anxious. I had a bad dream, she said, her voice small. I dreamed we had to leave and never see James again. Caroline opened her arms, and Emma came to her, leaning against her mother's shoulder but reaching one hand toward James. That's not going to happen, sweetheart, Caroline assured her, looking at James over Emma's head. We're figuring out how to all stay together. Really? Emma looked between them, hope dawning on her face. Like a real family? We already are a real family, James said gently. Maybe not a traditional one, but real all the same. Emma's relief was palpable. Can I tell Liam in the morning? He worries about it too, but he doesn't say anything because he doesn't want to make everyone sad. You can tell him, Caroline confirmed. But right now, back to bed. School tomorrow. After Emma returned to her room, Caroline turned to James with a wry smile. Apparently, we weren't as subtle about our concerns as we thought. Children who've experienced trauma develop heightened awareness of adult emotions, James noted. They're constantly scanning for threats to stability. Then we should be more explicit about our plans, Caroline decided. No more uncertainty for them to worry about. The following Saturday, they made it official. A family meeting in the garden that had become the heart of their shared healing. The October morning was crisp but sunny, perfect for the occasion. James had prepared hot chocolate with miniature marshmallows, Liam's favorite. Caroline had baked cinnamon rolls, their scent filling the kitchen with warmth. The children sat, at the garden table, clearly sensing the importance of the moment. James and Caroline had rehearsed what they wanted to say, careful to be clear without creating pressure or unrealistic expectations. "We've been talking about our living situation," Caroline began, "about what would be best for all of us going forward." "Are we moving out?" Liam asked immediately, his fingers tightening around his mug. "No," James answered firmly. "Just the opposite. We're making our current arrangement more permanent." The tension visibly left both children's bodies. Emma's eyes widened. "You mean we're staying here, all of us together?" Caroline nodded. "We're going to make some changes to the house to give everyone more space. The attic will become my bedroom and workspace. James will keep his room, and you two will keep your rooms. We'll be like a blended family," James explained. "Different from some families, but just as real. Your mom is your parent legally, and in every way that matters. I'll be—" He hesitated, searching for the right term. "Our James," Liam supplied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Emma nodded solemnly. "Our James, like how Sarah at school has a mom and dad and also a stepdad who picks her up on Tuesdays." "Something like that," Caroline agreed, exchanging a smile with James, although the exact details are a bit different. "Will you get married?" Emma asked, her practical nature asserting itself. The question caught both adults off guard. They had carefully avoided defining their own relationship, focusing instead on their shared commitment to the children. "We haven't discussed that," Caroline answered honestly. "Right now, we're focused on creating stability for you both. James and I are partners in taking care of you and friends who respect each other. The important thing," James added, "is that we're committed to being a family together. The exact structure might evolve over time, but the foundation is solid." Liam considered this, then reached for his ever-present sketchbook. "Can I draw our family to hang in the living room, so everyone who visits knows who we are?" "That's a wonderful idea," James said, his throat tight with emotion. "And can we celebrate?" Emma asked. "Like a family holiday, but just for us?" "Absolutely," Caroline agreed. "What did you have in mind?" "A special dinner," Emma decided. "And maybe we could invite Mrs. Chen and Detective Dawson and Dr. Finch, the people who helped us become a family." James met Caroline's gaze over the children's heads, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. From the darkest circumstances had emerged something unexpected and precious, not just healing for wounded children, but a new kind of family formed through shared purpose and genuine care. "That's perfect," he said. "A celebration of everyone who helped us find our way to each other." The family celebration took place on a Sunday evening in late October. The dining room that had once stood unused in James's solitary existence now hummed with conversation and laughter. Mrs. Chen brought her famous almond cookies. Detective Dawson arrived with his wife, both carrying bouquets of fall flowers. Dr. Finch came with a handmade quilt for the family, 4 panels with different designs, but stitched together into a cohesive whole. The children proudly showed their guests around the house, pointing out recent changes. Liam's art now prominently displayed throughout the home, the attic renovation in progress, the expanded garden with its new greenhouse. "You've created something remarkable here," Dr. Finch told James privately as they watched Caroline helping the children serve dessert. Not just healing for Emma and Liam, but a model of what's possible when people choose connection over isolation. "I was hiding from my past," James admitted, "punishing myself for a professional failure by withdrawing from everything meaningful. It took 2 scared children to show me another way forward. And what a way it is," Dr. Finch said, smiling as Liam carefully explained his latest drawing to Detective Dawson. "You know, families like yours, created through crisis, cemented through choice, they often develop exceptional resilience." James considered this. "Crisis as opportunity," It's a therapeutic concept I used to discuss theoretically. Now I'm living it. The evening concluded with Liam's unveiling of his family portrait, a meticulously rendered drawing of the four of them in the garden. He had captured James's thoughtful expression, Caroline's gentle smile, Emma's determined stance, and his own quiet presence. Around the border, he had drawn smaller vignettes, James and Liam planting seeds, Caroline and Emma knitting together, all four gathered around the dinner table. "It's perfect," Caroline said, tears in her eyes. "It shows who we really are." "A garden family," Liam explained seriously, "because we all help each other grow." Later that night, after their guests had departed and the children were asleep, James and Caroline sat on the back porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. The greenhouse they had built together stood at the garden's edge, its windows reflecting moonlight. "I never imagined my life taking this turn," Caroline said softly. "When I was hiding in that coastal town, working under a false name, I dreamed only of finding my children again. I never dared hope for this." She gestured to encompass the house, the garden, their shared existence. "Nor did I," James admitted. "After Tyler's case, I believed my capacity to help children was irreparably damaged. That isolation was the only safe option. And now? Now I understand that healing isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding the courage to connect again, despite the risks." He turned to face her directly. "Caroline, whatever shape our relationship takes going forward, I want you to know that meeting you and the children has been the greatest gift of my life." She reached across the space between their chairs, her hand finding his in the darkness. "The future will unfold as it should. For now, it's enough to know we're on the path together." Inside the house, the grandfather clock that had once marked James's solitary hours now measured time for a family brought together by circumstance and bound by choice. Its steady rhythm no longer echoed through empty rooms, but blended into the rich tapestry of shared lives, children's laughter, quiet conversations, the gentle sounds of healing happening day by day. November arrived with frost on the garden, beds and preparations for the children's first holiday season as a reunited family. James and Caroline continued adapting spaces and routines, learning to balance togetherness with healthy boundaries, finding their way through uncharted territory. With patience and mutual respect, the attic renovation was completed just before Thanksgiving. A comfortable bedroom and sitting area for Caroline that gave her private space while keeping her connected to the household below. James modified his study to create a dedicated art corner for Liam and a reading nook for Emma. The kitchen, once his domain of precise measurements, became a laboratory of shared experiments as all four developed their culinary skills together. On Thanksgiving Day, they hosted their first holiday gathering. Mrs. Chen, Detective Dawson and his family, Dr. Finch, and several new friends from the children's school and Caroline's workplace. The house that had once stood silent and closed now opened its doors wide, welcoming connection in all its forms. As James moved through the crowded rooms, making sure everyone had enough to eat, checking that the children weren't overwhelmed by the unusual activity, he caught sight of his reflection in the living room window. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the isolated figure who had stood in that same spot a year earlier, watching shadows on neighboring walls and debating whether to get involved. Liam found him there, tugging at his sleeve to show him a new drawing, this one depicting their Thanksgiving gathering with remarkable attention to how people connected with each other through conversation, shared food, gentle touches. "It's our wider family circle," Liam explained, "like rings in water when you throw in a stone." James studied the drawing, noting how Liam had placed their core family of four at the center, with concentric circles of friends and supporters radiating outward a perfect visual representation of how healing had spread from their initial connection to encompass an entire community. "You've captured it beautifully," he told Liam, his hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. "How connection creates more connection." "Like in the garden," Liam said wisely, "how one healthy plant helps all the others grow stronger." From across the room, Caroline caught his eye, her smile containing a world of shared understanding. Emma stood beside her, confidently explaining to Mrs. Chen how they had adapted James's precise stuffing recipe with her mother's more intuitive approach, a perfect metaphor for their blended family style. The grandfather clock struck 4, its familiar chimes, now just one note in the symphony of their shared life. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began drifting past the window, dusting the garden where so much healing had taken root. Inside, warmth and light pushed back against the gathering darkness, creating a beacon of hope in the quiet neighborhood on Maple Avenue. James thought of the weathered briefcase now stored openly on his bookshelf, no longer a hidden reminder of past failure, but an honored acknowledgement of the journey that had brought him here. Sometimes, he reflected, our deepest wounds become the very spaces from which new life emerges if we have the courage to remain open to unexpected possibilities. As he moved back into the gathering, responding to Caroline's gesture to join her, and the children for a family photograph, James carried with him the certainty that had grown alongside the garden and the children's recovery. Family isn't always what we expect or plan for. Sometimes it finds us when we least anticipate it, challenging us to expand our understanding of connection, belonging, and love. And sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most unexpected seeds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.